Hello everybody and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, The Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm going to do a deck tech on Tap This Way. It's a deck based around tapping and untapping your creatures. Now this deck is a lot more expensive than the last couple decks that I showed off, coming in right around $270. There wasn't a lot of cards I could switch out, and this deck came together pretty well, so I kept it the way it was and didn't try to find some cheaper alternatives. Also, the salt sum for this deck is right around 31, which is right below the average, which is going to make for a good deck. So, let's look into it. Arkellos Lagoon Mystic is 1 generic, 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue. Legendary creature, Turtle Shaman. As long as Arkellos Lagoon Mystic is tapped, other permanents enter the battlefield tapped. As long as Arkellos is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped. This ability doesn't just trigger on your turn, but your opponent's turns. So one of the key strategies throughout this deck is making sure that we can tap him so your opponent's stuff enters the battlefield, and when it's your turn, your stuff doesn't enter tap. Now let's look at some of the powerful artifacts we included in this deck. This time around, we have a lot of cards in our artifacts because we're going to use vehicles as a really powerful way to tap our commander and get value out of them. Starting off with maybe the most powerful artifact in our deck, we have Amulet of Vigor, 1 mana artifact. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped and under your control, untap it. This is just another repeated version of our commander, except even if our commander triggers, if we stack it correctly, we can still have it come in untapped after our commander taps it, meaning this is a really cool card and is really going to help us out even when our commander was tapped from attacking or whatever else we did with him. Next, we have Arcane Signet. No brainer, this should go in every commander deck. It's very powerful. Charcoal Diamond enters battlefield tapped. Well, now for 2 mana, it enters untapped, which isn't great, but it'll help out. Clown Car is our first vehicle, and it is from the new Infinity set. It's a very fun card. When Clown Car enters the battlefield, roll X 6-sided dice. For each odd result, create a 1/1 white clown artifact creature token. For each even result, put a +1/+1 on Clown Car. Crew 2. This is going to be a really fun card that's going to create a big creature and also a lot of little tokens. One of the cards that's really going to help us out and keep our opponent's creatures down is Meekstone. 1 mana artifact. Creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during the controller's untap step. If we can employ our powerful artifacts like Amulet of Vigor, it's not going to matter for us. We're going to untap stuff as it enters and making sure everybody else's stuff is tapped down all the time. Moon Snare Prototype. Artifact. Tap an untapped artifact or creature you control, add a blue. You can channel it for 4 and a blue, discard Moon Snare Prototype. The owner of target non-land permanent puts it into the top or bottom of their library. This is one card we can use to tap our commander at any time during yours or an opponent's turn. Next, we have Moss Diamond. Similar to Charcoal Diamond, it's not going to enter tapped because of our commander, and we can immediately tap it for a green mana. Orb of Dreams is another really powerful artifact, which is going to keep all of our creatures tapped when they enter the battlefield. But because of our commander, they're going to enter untapped. So our opponents are going to suffer, and we will greatly prosper. Paradise Mantle is another really powerful artifact equipment because we can play it for 0, equip it for 1, and then add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Next, we have Reaver Titan, 7 mana artifact vehicle. Void Shields, protection from mana value 3 or less. Gatling Blasters, whenever Reaver Titan attacks, it deals 5 damage to each opponent. Crew 4, this is a really big and powerful creature that we're going to use to drain our opponent's life. Renegade Freighter, 3 artifact vehicle. When Renegade Freighter attacks, it gets +1/+1 and trample until end of turn. Crew 2. This is a really cool card that's going to keep our opponents down and let us get ahead. Sky Diamond, similar to Moss Diamond and Charcoal Diamond, is going to enter the battlefield untapped, and we are going to be able to make a blue mana. Next, we have Sky Sovereign Console Flagship. 5 generic, legendary artifact vehicle. Flying. When Sky Sovereign Console Flagship enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Crew 3. Soul Ring is a no-brainer. It should be included in every commander deck. Next, we have Springleaf Drum. Similar to Paradise Mantle, but for 1 generic artifact, tap an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. Swiftfoot Boots is 2 generic artifact equipment. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. This is going to make it so we can swing and tap our commander very early early, making our opponents have to have their permanents enter the battlefield tapped quicker than normal. Thunderhawk Gunship is 6 generic mana artifact vehicle. Flying. When Thunderhawk Gunship enters the battlefield, create 2 2/2 white Astartes Warriors creature tokens with Vigilance. Whenever Thunderhawk Gunship attacks, attacking creatures you control gain flying until end of turn. This is an incredibly powerful card that's going to turn all of these big vehicles that don't already have flying into vehicles with flying when they attack as creatures. Unlicensed Hearse, 2 generic mana, artifact vehicle. Tap it to exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard. Unlicensed Hearse power and toughness are equal to the number of cards exiled with it. Crew 2. This is a really powerful card, especially against graveyard decks, because you're going to be able to exile those cards they want to get back while making this card bigger and bigger. Next, we have Untethered Express, 4 generic mana, artifact vehicle. Trample. When Untethered Express attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Crew for only 1. This is going to turn any of our creatures we have into being able to crew this, and it's just going to get bigger every time we attack. And finally, we have the Weatherlight, 4 generic mana, legendary artifact vehicle. Whenever Weatherlight deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Historic cards are artifacts, legendaries, sagas are all historic. Crew 3. This is another great card that's going to help us dig through our deck for more of our artifacts and legendary creatures. Alright, and with that, let's look at some of these creatures we got in the deck. First off, we have Arachmathes, Slumbering Isle, 2 green-blue, legendary creature Kraken. Arachmathes, Slumbering Isle enters the battlefield tapped with 5 slumber counters on it. As long as Arachmathes has a slumber counter on it, it's a land. Whenever you cast a spell, you may remove a slumber counter from Arachmathes. Right away, we're going to be able to tap this for 2 and a blue and hopefully cast a spell. So on turn 1, we only have 4 counters, and on the next turn or 2, we can hopefully get it down to 0. One of the cards we're going to be able to take great value in is Avenger of Zendikar, 5 green-green, creature elemental. When Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. Later on, we'll get into some of the lands we put in this deck because I did not keep it basic, because we can take advantage of that untap and get some really good value from a lot of the lands. Going along with landfall abilities, our next card is Azusa, Lost But Seeking, 2 and a green, legendary creature Human Monk. You may play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. If we got them in hand or are able to play them, Avenger of Zendikar is going to greatly benefit from these extra land drops. Next, we have Colossal Sky Turtle, 4 green-green blue, enchantment creature turtle. It has flying and ward 2, and it also has 2 channel abilities. The first one is 2 and a green, discard Colossal Sky Turtle, return target card from your graveyard to your hand, or channel 1 and a blue, discard Colossal Sky Turtle, return target creature to its owner's hand. This is also a 6/5. Regardless, if we take advantage of this big flying ward creature, or either of its channel abilities, it's going to make a great addition for this deck. Elvish Reclaimer, a singular green, creature elf warrior. Elvish Reclaimer gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more land cards in your graveyard. 2, tap, sacrifice a land, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. We're going to be able to get a lot of great value out of this card, putting whatever lands we need onto the battlefield. Fate Stitcher, 3 and a blue. You may tap or untap another target permanent, and you can unearth it for a single blue. If there's a point, maybe we want to make friends with our opponent and untap our commander so they can play stuff untapped, this would be a great creature to have to do so. Next, we have Jaspa Sentinel, singular green, creature elf rogue. Reach, tap an untapped creature you control and add 1 mana of any color. This is like a lot of cards in this deck. It's going to help us make sure we get our value out of our commander. Kelpie Guide, 2 and a blue, creature beast. Tap another target permanent you control. Tap target permanent. Activate only if you control 8 or more lands. We're going to definitely be able to get our value when we tap our commander with this card, but if we have 8 or more lands, which we surely will with this deck, then we can tap any permanent we want. Loam Dryad, green, creature Dryad Horror. Tap an untapped creature you control. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This is just another one, just like Jasper Sentinel. Notion Thief, 2 blue-black, creature Human Rogue. Flash, if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps. Instead, each player skips that draw and you draw that card instead. Notion Thief is a really powerful card that is going to make sure your hand is never empty, and whenever your opponents want to draw cards, well, you get them instead. Oak Street Innkeeper, 2 and a green, creature elf. As long as it's not your turn, tapped creatures you control have hexproof. Your opponents are going to want to remove your commander because it's going to put them down, and this is going to make it so they can't. Obnixilis the Fallen, 3 black-black, legendary creature demon. Landfall, whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, you may have a target player lose 3 life. If you do, put 3 +1/+1 counters on Omnixilus the Fallen. This deck, as you will see and have seen, is all about landfall, and this is another great card to add to it because typically there's not a lot of black decks that have landfall, so taking advantage of Omnixilus is going to be really powerful and help us put ourselves ahead. Rampaging Baloths. 4 green. Creature, beast, trample, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. We want to play all the lands we can and get a lot of value off of them, so Rampaging Baloths is a great card to have. Rupunop Excavator, 2 and a green, creature, Naga Cleric. You may play lands from your graveyard. Well, we're going to get our land drops one way or another, so Rupunop Excavator is going to help us do so. Ceruli Caretaker, green, creature, dryad, defender. Tap an untapped creature you control and add 1 mana of any color. This is the third one of these we have in this deck or so let's continue on. Sarlith, the Viper's Fang, 2 green, legendary creature, human warlock. Other tapped creatures you control have death touch. Other untapped creatures you control have hexproof. 1 tap, untap target creature or land you control. If we need to untap our commander, this is another way we can do it. Scootswarm, 2 green, creature, insect. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scootswarm instead. With all those landfall triggers, Scootswarm is a no-brainer for this deck. Tatiova, Benthic Druid, 3 green-blue. Legendary creature, Merfolk Druid. Landfall. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Another great landfall card to include in this deck. Tiller Engine, 2 generic, artifact creature, construct. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, choose one, untap that land, or tap non-land permanent an opponent controls. Well, if our commander isn't out, this is a great way we can play some of those really valuable lands we have. And if we have them out, well then we can tap our opponent's permanents, letting us swing in and hit them. Wayward Swordtooth, 2 and a green, creature, dinosaur. Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Wayward Swordtooth can't attack or block unless you have the city's blessing. This is going to let us hit those land drops faster and faster, giving us the Ascend trigger and being able to swing in with a 5/5. Zamoni, Quandrix Prodigy, green and a blue. Legendary creature, human wizard. 1 tap. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. 4 tap. Draw a card. If you control 8 or more lands, draw 2 cards instead. Not only is this going to let us put cards onto the battlefield, but we're going to be able to draw cards off of it after we have enough lands. Now, let's look at some of those enchantments. I've only included a few enchantments in this deck because they are going to help us out, but they're not really the biggest way we're going to win in this deck. So first off, we have Freed from the Real, 2 and a blue, enchantment aura. Enchant creature, tap enchanted creature, or untap enchanted creature. This is what we want to put on our commander so we can tap it whenever we want to make our opponents have to have their permanents enter the battlefield tapped. Pemnin's Aura, 1 blue, enchant creature. Blue, untap enchanted creature. Blue, enchanted creature gains flying. Blue, enchanted creature can't be the target of spells or abilities this turn. This is going to help us untap our commander whenever we want. Verity Circle, 2 and a blue, enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, if it isn't being declared as an attacker, you may draw a card. 4 and a blue, tap target creature without flying. Well, there's a couple ways in this deck where we can tap our opponent's creatures, and we can get a lot of value. Or, we can pay 5 and tap them. It's not the best way to draw a card, but in a dire situation, it could be pretty helpful. Now, let's look at some of those instants that we included in this deck. Again, there's only a few here because it's not the main strategy for this deck. But first off, we have Counterspell, 2 blue, and instant, counter target spell. Simple as that. Growth Spiral, green and a blue. Instant, draw a card. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. This is going to be a great card to help us ramp early. Next, we have Hagar Mauling, instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast if an opponent controls no basic lands. Destroy target creature. There's not a lot of kill spells in this deck, so this is going to help us out. What else is going to help us out is Infernal Grasp, 1 in a black, instant. Destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. In Commander, I'm not really worried about losing 2 life, and if I can kill any creature I want, it's well worth it. Noxious Revival, 1 Phyrexian mana, meaning you can either pay green or 2 life. Put target card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. If our opponents end up killing one of our creatures, or we want to get one of our instant sorceries or enchantments back, Noxious Revival is a great way to do that. Now let's talk about the lands we included for this deck. This is definitely a lot different than we normally do for these videos because I like to keep it pretty basic. But because of our commander's ability, we're going to be able to take advantage of these great land cards that we couldn't before. I'm not going to go through all these lands because they pretty much do the same thing, but I'll pick out a few key ones that I think are really important. First off, we have Command Tower. This is a staple that should be in every commander deck. Another cool card is Dimir Aqueduct. We return a land to our hand, but it taps for a blue and a black. So, because of our commander, it's going to enter the battlefield untapped, and we're going to be able to immediately take advantage of that mana. Similarly, we have Golgari Rot Farm, which does the exact same thing. Myriad Landscape, I think, is a really great card for this deck, because you're going to pay 2 and sacrifice it to search for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type and put them onto the battlefield tapped. This way, we can get 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield untapped and maybe be able to use them. Another great card is Opulent Palace. It usually enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for 1 of each of the mana that we use in this deck, making it pretty much a commander tower for this deck. Moving on, we have Simic Growth Chamber, which, just like Golgari Rot Farm, taps for 2 mana and we can immediately use it. And finally, we have the Zagoth Triome, which, just like Opulent Palace, can tap for 1 mana of any of our colors. The basics in this deck is a little lower than normal, just because we don't need as many of them. We have all of these great tap lands that, because of our commander, will enter untapped and we'll be able to take great advantage of them, making most of these tap lands just as powerful as the original dual lands. Now, let's look at the sorceries that are in this deck. We do have a lot of sorceries in this deck because there's a lot we can do. First off, we have Army of the Damned, 5 black, black, black. Create 13 tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with a flashback of 7 black, black, black. There isn't as many creatures in this deck, and especially because we're going to be crewing a lot of creatures, once we get all of our lands out there, we're going to be able to make a bunch of zombies, crew all our creatures, and attack with the rest for massive damage. Casualties of War, 2 black, black, green, green. This is a really versatile board wipe, which can be directed in any way we want. Cultivate, 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put 1 on the battlefield tapped, and the other one into your hand. Then shuffle. This is going to put a land into our hand that we can play on our next turn, and it's going to put a land onto the battlefield that hopefully will enter untapped. Emergent Ultimatum, black, black, green, 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 blue, blue. Sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 monocolored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffles that card into your library. You may cast the other cards without paying their mana cost. Exile Emergent Ultimatum. This is going to be really powerful for some of those really big artifacts we want to put into play. Or Avenger of Zendikar, which we want to come in. So they're going to have to make a tough choice. Exsanguinate, X black, black. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. This is going to be a cool way for you to be able to use all that mana you're creating with all these land ramp spells. Farseek, 1 and a green. Sorcery. Search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Because it says plains, island, swamp, or mountain, we can go and find either one of our dual island or swamps and be able to put it onto the battlefield and get a lot of value out of it. Harmonize, 2 green, green. Sorcery. Draw 3 cards. This is a really great way for green to get some more cards into their hand. Kodama's Reach, 2 green, green. Sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands. Reveal those cards. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other one into your hand. This, just like Cultivate, is going to let us ramp quick and early. This next card is really interesting. It's Life and Death. You can pay 1 green for life. All lands you control become 1/1 creature tokens until end of turn. They're all still lands. Or Death, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. This is a really versatile spell that's really going to be powerful in this deck. Rampant Growth, 1 and a green. Search your library for a basic land card. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Sylvan Awakening, 2 and a green. Until your next turn, all lands you control become 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, and haste. They're still lands. We're going to be getting a lot of lands out onto the battlefield, so this is going to be a great way to take advantage of them. Titania's Command, 4 green, green. Sorcery, choose 2. Exile target player's graveyard. You gain 1 life for each card exiled this way. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Create 2 2/2 green bear creature tokens, or put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. If we compare this with Life or Sylvan Awakening, we can make all of our lands into really big creatures and swing out for a lot of damage. And finally, we have Villainous Wealth, X black, green, blue. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of the library. You may cast any number of spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. This is a cool way we're going to be able to use our opponent's creatures against them. And that's it. As you can see, we have a pretty good mana producers to mana pip distribution. We definitely have a lot more green, but I like to keep the mana producers even because for the most part, you're going to want to have a couple of each pip for casting your spells. Our average mana curve is also pretty good. We have a couple at 0, and our mains are at 1, 2, 3, and 4, with a few at 5, 6, 7, and 8. meaning we have an overall average of 3.13, meaning we should be able to cast a lot of creatures and take advantage of our mana very well. And that's it. As you can see here, some of the tokens we're going to need for this deck, but this is a really powerful deck, and one I'm even considering building myself. My only concern against this kind of deck is that it's really going to put your opponents down, and they might not like playing against it. So, make sure you have fun and be fair, and also maybe use Archelaus' ability in a more friendly manner to make some friends instead of opponents. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you want to check out the Back to the Basics video on Tap and Untap, I'll link it here in the cards and in the description below. But that's it, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.